my VO2 max. I believe it was 78.5.
That's like Tour de France level. Ed's a legend in Silicon Valley and in the tech space. Helped Facebook cross 1 billion users, went on to Uber and helped engineer hypergrowth there as the VP of product and growth. But in 2017, Ed walked away from the tech scene for a bit, rebuilt his body, and 6 months later won the Ironman.
I was really just focused on getting back into shape, focused on my own health. And it was during that time that not only did I get into Ironman and triathlons, but that I discovered Whoop and fell in love with the product because it was helping me kind of live that healthier. About 7 years ago, I first invested in the company and he asked me to join the board. If you really set goals and put in that consistency as it relates to behavior change.
You stepped away from Uber to reset your health and life. In 6 months, did this thing that would probably be impossible for 99% of the people. How did you do it?
Well, yeah.
Hey, Traction fam, super excited to have Ed Baker here from Whoop. And I think this has been 10 years in the making. I first reached out to him for our first Traction conference in 2015 and
that's right.
Followed his journey.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. And I just responded to that same email that we were going back and forth on. But Ed's a legend in Silicon Valley and in the tech space. He started building products at Harvard, scaled Friendly to 25 million users, and then sold it to Facebook, helped Facebook cross 1 billion users, then went on to Uber and helped engineer hypergrowth there as the VP of product and growth. All the products that Ed has touched and shaped to millions and hundreds of millions of users are products we love and use till today, like from the Meta to Uber, and now he's at Whoop. But in 2017, Ed walked away from the tech scene for a bit, rebuilt his body, and 6 months later won the Ironman. That's accurate?
I think it was something like that. Yeah, that was Ironman Lake Placid, the first one I did. I have to interrupt you because I feel like you're giving me a lot of credit for being fortunate enough to pick the right companies that had the product market fit and were already growing so fast even before I was there. But, a lot of it was about being at the right place at the right time.
I often say that luck and risk are two sides of the same coin, right? The ones who get lucky are the ones who keep playing risk. And I think you were playing in the right spaces at the right time. Now, what was your timing at that Ironman? Or what's your PR?
So in Lake Placid, I was a little over 9 hours, but then a month later, I did Ironman Copenhagen, which was a faster course. And I think my time was 8 hours, 27 minutes.
Wow.
So
wow.
Before I did Ironman races, I'd never done a race longer than a marathon. So I'm used to, races being over within 2.5 hours. So to do a race that lasts for 8.5 to 9 hours, that was a totally different experience for me.
Yeah, I want to get all into it. And then you founded AnyQuestion, which Whoop acquired. And then today you're the CPO at Whoop, overseeing product, software design, growth, and healthcare teams. For the Traction fam who haven't heard of Ed, Ed's sort of the unsung hero of Silicon Valley, having grown companies to levels that people can't even imagine. But you're a rare human being who not only understands growth at scale, but also human performance at the highest level and what it takes to sustain both. And a lot of entrepreneurs, what we do is we focus so much on the business, we neglect the family, we neglect the health, and then we burn out and leave. And that's what happened to me in 2020 after my company was acquired by private equity. After the wire hit the bank account, literally 2 weeks later, I had booked the whole fam to Bora Bora because for 10 years, I'd been doing startup after startup, all pre-AI, but in the AI space that had failed. And my wife was paying the bills, and 2020 hits. The acquisition happens after 4 or 5 months of deep due diligence. And you know how that is if you've seen it multiple times. The wire hits my bank, book everyone to Bora Bora. The morning of Bora Bora, my lungs literally collapsed. I'm in the ER. I was fat, overweight, metabolic syndrome. And the interesting thing is my wife's the ER physician at Stanford.
Really? Oh my goodness.
So that was a big learning for me. And then I ejected from the scene and focused on health and wellness and just transformed myself and went through that journey. But a lot of people, we neglected. And what's amazing about you is you have a wonderful family. You got 4 kids?
4 kids, that's right. And a wonderful wife who's done all the heavy lifting for me, especially during those years where, I was at Facebook and Uber and even now at Whoop. Things are really busy, and especially with 4 young kids, fortunate to have a partner really does help make all of this work in a big way.
We're lucky. I say the same thing. My wife was managing a very busy ER job while running the fam, and I had only one job: to make one company work. I didn't have many jobs,
That's
right?
right.
And
Exactly.
your spouse is truly your life's co-founder. The right one will help you build your empire, and the wrong one will bankrupt your dreams. I often
That's
see
so
that.
true. That's so true. I'm very fortunate to have one who's supported me along the way.
Same here. How
Yeah.
long you been married?
16 years, though we met over 20 years ago back in Boston. So I dragged her out to Silicon Valley for over a decade. And like you, I basically had that decade where everything was crazy. First went out there for Stanford Business School, then started a company, sold it to Facebook, spent time at Uber. And by the end of that decade, I was ready for an extended break. And I also had not really been taking care of my health and fitness during that time. I'd been a competitive athlete in college, and even after college, I ran the marathon competitively, ran in the Olympic trials back in 2007. But there was kind of this decade from 2007 to 2017 where life just got really busy and I wasn't taking care of myself. And so that's why in 2017, when I left Uber and I said to my wife, I'm ready for a break. Where do you want to live? And she said, why don't we move back to the East Coast where we originally met and where she's from? I was kind of hoping she'd say, oh, let's move to Hawaii. But she said, let's move to Boston. So we've, lived in Cambridge now for the last almost 9 years now. The first 5 years of that, I was really just focused on getting back into shape, focused on my own health and wellness. And it was during that time that not only did I get into Ironman and triathlons, but that I discovered Whoop and fell in love with the product because it was helping me kind of live that healthier. But I also got to know the founder and CEO, Will Ahmed, about 7 years ago. I first invested in the company and he asked me to join the board. So I've been on the board for about 7 years. And it's a really exciting company to be a part of because I feel like it combines kind of like everything I was doing in Silicon Valley in terms of consumer tech, but also everything that I am passionate about when it comes to health and wellness.
That's fantastic. And it feels like it's your life's calling, right? Because you were a college athlete at Harvard. I think I read somewhere that you noticed you weren't as productive when you were not training. And this ties to interesting study. I did a reel on this that went viral. Is a Naperville High School, although it's in a very expensive neighborhood, wealthy neighborhood of Chicago, but they had improved the rankings of their students over a multi-year study from to like top 5 in science and top in math just by doing this one thing, 0-hour PE. Before class, they made students do intense exercise for 45 minutes. And that just proves that no brain function exercise can improve. And I think this was a study from the 90s. And so talk about that. How did your athletics shape your discipline and eventually pull you into entrepreneurship? And specifically tied to this is like you weren't productive when you weren't training.
I appreciate that question. And it is something that I noticed in college. As a runner, I ran indoor track in the winter and outdoor track in the spring. So running really is a 3-season sport, and there's very little time in between to take a break. But our coach would give us, a week off between cross country and track season. And I remember always thinking, oh, during this week off, I'll be so much more productive because I won't have to go to practice and I'll have all this extra time catch up on my work and that kind of stuff. And I found that week off ended up being one of my least productive weeks because I no longer had a routine and a rhythm. And I also wasn't getting the exercise in. And I do agree with you that just getting some exercise in every morning can make a huge difference in just how productive I am throughout the rest of the day. So that was a lesson I first learned in college, but still to this day, I try to abide by that and get a workout in first thing in the morning before I start the rest of the day.
Did you lose that somewhere along the way? Because you said you had to step away from, building companies, Silicon Valley, high pressure, high velocity to take 5 years off to rebuild your health. What happened? Was there some event that triggered that?
It's a good question. I think life just happened and things got so busy that I just lost a bit of that balance in my life. And I'd say, it probably started when I was working on my own startup, Friendly, right after graduating from Stanford. Working on your own startup, it can be a grind and you feel like you always can be doing more, and I thought if I have an extra hour in the day, I should put it into the startup. I shouldn't put it into working out or sleeping that extra hour. And I feel like that kind of mentality followed through at both Facebook and Uber, where there were cultures where people were working long hours and working really hard. And it's kind of what everyone was doing. Ironically, when I look back on that now, I actually think I would have been a lot more productive if I had taken better care of my body and gotten extra sleep every day and gotten that workout work out in every day. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do now at Whoop. It's easier to do it at Whoop because, our company is all about encouraging people to live longer, healthier lives and change their behavior to do so. In fact, we incentivize our employees to sleep more and get better recovery scores. And if they do that enough over the course of a month, we actually give them like a cash bonus to incentivize that behavior, because we find that you can be a lot more productive if you take care of your body, in fewer hours, you can actually get more done. I kind of lost track of that a bit during that decade in Silicon Valley.
But Silicon Valley, and maybe to this day, right? So we had a similar story, but when I had that health incident, we moved to Dubai for a couple of years to just eject from the environment, because my wife was like, you're going to come out of the hospital, start another company. And this can't happen. I was 50, 60 pounds overweight, high visceral fat. So we moved to Dubai just to change the environment. And then when we left in 2 years after I was in a better place and health and everything was in the right spot, we didn't move back to Silicon Valley. We actually moved to Austin, which is where my in-laws are. Similar thing. And what I noticed here in Austin is like, you immediately sense the level of intensity. People are not like working like Silicon Valley. And one of the things I think I started to notice is if a place has really nasty gyms, maybe the people there don't care about the health culture. And Austin has some of the most beautiful gyms, like the Lifetimes and the Equinoxes, the longevity versions of them, right? Like, and
that's
Silicon Valley has none, because we go back and forth.
Right.
My wife still maintains her position there. And whenever I go to any gym, they're all trashy. So that's when the culture is very work hard and only work hard. There's no play hard in there. But this is a very important point you bring up, is if I was more focused on my health, I would have been more productive. Can you break that down for us and what you're seeing now in your role at Whoop with executives using it and their performance?
Sure. Well, first of all, just personally, I feel like on nights where I get a good amount of sleep and I wake up with a green recovery score, those are the days I'm most productive in the office. And I feel like I can do more in 8 hours feeling like that than I would have been able to do in 12 hours waking up with a red recovery score where I didn't get that much sleep. I think it's just all about being more efficient with your time. And I think there have been enough studies now that show that like creativity and all of your best work is done when you really take care of your body. We now have a metric within the Whoop app called Whoop Age, which is basically your biological age or a measure of your health span, as opposed to your chronological age. And we have these 9 contributors that we look at to determine your Whoop age. And those contributors, they're all fairly simple things. It's things like, how much are you sleeping every night? How consistent is your sleep? This is something I didn't realize the importance of until working here, is that going to bed and waking up around the same time every day is extremely important. And the more fluctuation there is, the lower quality your sleep is. And then, of course, a lot of stuff related to exercise. How much time are you getting in these different heart rate zones? How many steps are you taking per week? How much strength training time are you doing? So all of those things kind of contribute to your Whoop age, which is a measure of your health span and your longevity. It's nice to every week be able to get a reminder like, hey, this week, Ed, you did a good job, you're getting younger, or this week, Ed, you didn't do a very good job and you're getting older. But it kind of reinforces kind of those basic behaviors and I can really tell the difference in a week where I'm really taking care of my body versus a week where I'm not. And I'm not going to pretend like every single week I do things perfectly. I do still have weeks that I don't do really well. And in fact, this morning I woke up with a red recovery score. I went out last night and didn't sleep as well as I, like to. So of course those things happen, but now that I measure it with Whoop, I can at least try to minimize the number of days that are like that.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. I used to hear the other side of the story, given my wife worked in the Stanford ER and still does for a very long time. And she'd tell me, you're powering through crazy hours on caffeine, cortisol, and carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. You don't even get up from your desk and you just look up and you're just on and on and on. And she's like, I've seen like thousands and thousands of patients. They were fine. Everyone felt fine yesterday till they had an event. And then it happened to me. You always think it's not going to happen to you. And like you said, the basics are like sleep, exercise, eating clean, and waking up. And sleeping at the right time. Now, I want to dive into something really interesting and super fascinating. You stepped away from Uber to reset your health and life. And you, in 6 months, did this thing that would probably be impossible for 99% of the people. How did you do it? What was your protocol to go from like, okay, you know what, I'm not training, I'm not doing anything, to like near winning an Ironman, hitting PRs. What did that look like? I mean, that's a lot of commitment and discipline, but 6 months is like unreasonable also, right?
Well, it may have been 6 months of like dedicated training. I clearly benefited from the fact that I was an endurance athlete for most of my life. And one thing that was a bit surprising to me was just the fact that I could go 10 years without working out that much and that it actually came back fairly quickly. But I think that's because, I mean, I basically was a distance runner from age 12 until, 30. So 18 years of like really putting in a lot of work, I think probably contributed to me having a higher VO2 max. So even though kind of between 30 and 40, I took that decade off where I wasn't working out as much, I was able to get back into shape more quickly, than if I were starting from scratch. But that said, I've seen other people who literally are starting from scratch, who don't have a background in endurance sports. And, I think it all comes down to just the consistency of every day putting in the work and being able to measure your results too. And seeing like, this is where I found Whoop to be helpful. If every week it can reinforce that good behavior. There's a coworker of mine who using Whoop was able to lose, I think he lost about 50 pounds in, a couple of months. And it was just through that consistent behavior change. So I think it's incredible what the body is capable of. It's incredible what the body is capable of if you really like set goals and put in that consistency as it relates to behavior change.
One interesting point here that you brought up and so many people ignore, and for the younger audience, I think this is imperative because I experienced the same. I used to train in my teens and 20s, like near bodybuilding shape. And then I took a huge break for 10 years like you, and I tanked. I was literally one step away from dying. And then when I changed my environment and started training, it came back quick. So this point of muscle memory, I think it works in endurance. It works in almost any fitness related field. Is if you train young and you do that for enough time, for a long enough time, even if you take a break, the body recognizes and you will adapt or go back to that original state a lot faster than somebody starting from scratch in their late 30s or 40s. For the younger people, I think it's so important to train, even if you keep pushing these things off, but you build that base, right?
Yeah, if you are younger right now listening to this, that's a good reason to do it now. And if you do fall off the wagon for a few years, a lot of us do for different reasons, whether you have a really busy job or there's also like starting a family and having young kids. Like you can't sleep well at night if you've got a baby that's waking you up several times every night and that kind of stuff. So there are things that will get in the way. But if you do start young and put in that work, then when there are some years where you can't be as consistent, I think you can come back more quickly.
I want to ask, what was your VO2 max before you started training for the Ironman, and what is it now? I mean, even if you remember.
I'm not sure if I actually ever measured my VO2 max before doing the Ironman training, but when I did measure my VO2 max for the first time, I can remember at MGH, Mass General Hospital in their sports cardiology lab, I believe it was 78.5.
That's like sort of Tour de France level. That's higher than that, than the average. And how old were you?
I was about 40 at that time. That was after quite a bit of training, after I was doing those Ironmans that we were talking about. I think I was 39 or 40. I more recently measured my VO2 max here at Whoop and Whoop Labs on the second floor here. And this was about a year ago. I think it was more in the low 70s. If I remember correctly, it might have been 72.5. So I'm now, 46, almost 47. So it's about 7 years later, and I'm not training like I was for the Ironman 7 years ago, but I was still happy to see my VO2 max was above 70.
Wow. So, it's funny because I've almost had my lungs collapse, right? And I'm in the 50s. Yeah. I'm 45, turning 46 this year. Okay. And my goal over the next 6 months, I have a funny challenge with my wife, is to bump it to 75. And she's like, how are you even going to do it?
I love that goal. Months. That's an ambitious goal in 6 months. Well, keep me posted on how that goes. That's amazing.
So we're just going to get started in the next month or so. So like, I'm going to bump my VO2 max to 75 and document the journey while she's going to be she's now my physician because she's transitioned into longevity. And so she does my blood work, my labs, everything. So it's interesting.
Do you have a plan to do that?
Whatever I could find publicly available, but that's what I was going to ask is like, what's the ideal way to train for that?
Well, I love doing, kind of VO2 max intervals
The four by
whether
fours is
that's,
what I do. Yeah.
yeah. When you say 4x4s, do you mean 4x4 minutes or 4x400 on the
4 minute
track?
all out sprint and then 4 minute
Oh,
sort of
cool. Yeah.
recovery pace.
I think that's a good one. I also like to do some shorter ones. So one of my favorite VO2 max workouts is like, 10 to 15 by 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And maybe you eventually get that up to 20 by 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And that can either be like going out on a run on the track, roughly doing 400s, like 16 by 400 is a great workout where you get a little over a minute rest for each one. Or if I get on the erg on the rowing machine, similar thing, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and you're just going as hard as you can during that minute on. And I find that just gets my heart rate up really high. But a minute, I feel like it's one I actually like to start with when I'm getting back into shape, because I feel like I can always do one more minute, and then
Yeah.
like by the end of the minute, I'm feeling totally exhausted. Like I can't do any more. And then I take my minute of rest. And by the end of that 60 seconds of rest, I'm like, okay, I think I can do one more, so a minute is just short enough where I feel like I can do it, even if I'm out of shape, but just long enough where it actually, I think, has some real beneficial impact on your VO2 max.
That's very good advice, is like you start at like 15, 20, work yourself up to one and then expand. Like for the people listening, don't go and try to sprint 4 minutes if you're doing it the
Right.
first time.
It's hard to
You
start
gotta
with a 4 minute. Yeah.
you gotta work yourself up. So I'll keep you posted actually, because I'll be wearing the Whoop
Awesome.
and testing it. And we
Oh,
just went
great.
to the lab at UT Austin and did my VO2 max test. And so
Oh,
I'm like, you know
awesome.
what, I'm gonna bump it to 75 and let's see where it goes. This is great advice.
Well, keep me
Now,
posted. That's
definitely. Now, optimizing stress, right? You've worked in some very ultra high stress environments, high velocity. Like I can't even like describe to the audience the level of velocity that happens at like an Uber at hypergrowth phase or like Facebook at hypergrowth phase. What do you see high performers do consistently wrong about stress, and how do you train that as a muscle? Because eliminating is not an option, right? When you work in these companies. Now that you look back, I had to take a break. Some people don't have the option to take a break.
Totally. Yeah. And you're right. You can't just eliminate the stress. But I think, well, first of all, I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you are taking care of your body and getting the sleep that you need and getting exercise in the morning, I just find I'm so much more resilient to stress if my body's in a good place. So I'd say that's number one. I think the other thing is like, it's important to remember that you are like at a moment in time where things are stressful, but at some point in the future, you will no longer be in that moment. So everything is kind of temporary, and it's easier to say that than to feel that way. But I think especially now when I look back to, some of the most stressful moments at Uber, for example, I'm no longer there. It's all in the past. I learned a lot from those experiences in the moments they were very stressful. But now that I can like look back on it and remember it in that way, I feel like that almost makes like new moments of stress that I'm in now. I just remember like, oh, I've been through even more stressful stuff than what I'm going through right now. And this is all temporary. I'm going to do the best that I can do. And that's all you can ask of anyone, is to just like work through it and know that it's not going to feel this way forever.
Exactly. And I think taking care of yourself is a huge part of it, right? I mean, watching those metrics that we talked about. But what does your personal routine now look like? You wake up, like what time do you wake up? You've got 4 kids, so you can't train like an Ironman probably while managing a huge role at Whoop. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I have a pretty like boring daily routine, which is my wife and I go to bed super early and wake up super early.
What
So
is that? What does super early mean?
Well, we have 4 kids, as I mentioned. Our 2 younger ones, we put them down around like 8 o'clock, and then we go to bed before our teenage daughters go to bed these days. So my wife and I are usually asleep by 9 o'clock or 9:30,
Wow.
and then we're up around 5 and kind of get an early start to the day. And so what I like to do is go downstairs, have a coffee, catch up on some emails, and then I like to get a workout in, maybe starting around 6 or 6:30, and be done with that in time to drop the kids off at school around 8 o'clock, and then go into the office after that. So I feel like by 9 a.m., I try not to schedule any work meetings before 9 a.m., but by 9 a.m., when I'm kind of officially starting the workday, I feel like I've already accomplished quite a bit. But then on the flip side, I try to get home and have earlier dinners with the family. By the way, that really helps with sleep too, is if you can eat several hours before you go to bed, I think you just sleep quite a bit better. And so I try to get, an early dinner in with the family, then do some more work after dinner, and then go to bed.
What's interesting for the audience is they see this as like, oh, this is, it doesn't sound exciting, but like this is what every longevity expert talks about is you wake up, you boost your morning cortisol, right? By drinking that coffee, by working out in the morning. And if you spike your morning cortisol, then it sets your circadian rhythm go down at night, which is when you want it to be lower, and you can sleep. And then eating multiple hours before sleep, not scrolling, all of the stuff you talked about. This is what elite athletes do, but it's their lifestyle, so it feels normal. Like you're not talking about it in an exciting way because you're not an Instagram influencer who talks about it's like, oh, I do this and that, the other thing. It's part of your lifestyle since you were a kid, probably. So this is great to know. In terms of like your personal health, when you had sort of put it on the back burner for the 10 years, and you decided to make the switch, were there like one or two levers you pulled that were like significant ROI?
I think the biggest ones are probably the ones have already spoken about, which is number one for sure is sleep. I think that's probably the biggest one. And number two, I'd say, is nutrition. And if I had to say like what are the most important things I would focus on nutrition wise, I find that number one, I like to eat protein, and that really helps when I'm exercising a lot. And I just I feel like I can never eat enough protein, and then less alcohol because this is where the Whoop data really helps too. I find if I have like even one alcoholic drink, it can really hurt my recovery score, and two drinks definitely will hurt my recovery score. So I'm not perfect. I'll still have drinks some nights, and I'll not always eat like the high protein, low carb meals, but I do try to eat kind of higher protein, less carbs, healthy fats, that kind of thing.
Are you very measured about the protein? Like how many grams of protein are you getting per pound of body weight kind of thing? Or?
I don't measure it. I just eat as much as I can. I probably should measure it, but I don't. I just, any opportunity I get, I just try to consume more.
But, like based on your athletic lifestyle, being an elite athlete, it's probably also second nature, right? Once you're in that rhythm, you're like waking up a certain time, working out, falling asleep at a certain time. Even I think these eating habits and protocols are needed for people who are trying to figure it out. But then it just becomes part of the day. You know what your plate looks like, you know how much of it is protein, and your body moves in that sort of, I guess, flow state, if you will.
Totally. Yep.
Now let's transition to Whoop and sort of building the future of health optimization. You're in charge of like literally feels like more than half the organization, from like product to like health and the growth of all of it. What is most exciting in the Whoop pipeline that you're open to talking about?
Yeah. Well, let's see. There's some things I can talk about and some things I probably shouldn't. So in terms at a high level, the things that really get me excited about Whoop are all of the investments we're making in healthcare. So earlier last year, we released Whoop Advanced Labs, which is the blood testing where you test 65 biomarkers and you can see which of your biomarkers are off. And then we actually help you come up with an action plan to address the biomarkers that are off. And we partially do that with our Whoop AI companion or coach in the app. You can, talk with it to help improve the metrics that are off. And I guess that's the second area of investment that I'm really excited about is everything we're doing with that AI companion. We really want it to feel like there's someone there like who's constantly monitoring everything going on in your life and giving you feedback on how to live a longer, healthier life. So, and with AI, there's just more and more that's possible there. So I'd say healthcare investments and AI investments are two areas I'm particularly excited about. When it comes to other healthcare investments, beyond the advanced labs, we are planning to just give members more and more opportunities to basically do more tests, ingest more of their health data to really personalize the Whoop experience for them and to help make sure everything is okay. So without getting into details, you can imagine other things we're probably going to want to put under that umbrella beyond just the basic 65 biomarker blood panel.
And the blood panel, I think you guys partner with like a big chain, right? Is that right?
With Quest Diagnostics, yeah. So you can just go to your local Quest Diagnostics to get your blood drawn, and then all of the blood work is reviewed by real clinicians who will write up a report and summarize the findings. And then that can then be ingested into the Whoop AI to allow you to interact with that and ask questions.
This is fantastic because I don't think Whoop is a wearable company. Whoop is a healthcare company. That's what I feel talking to you.
No, it really is. Yeah.
And it's exciting. It sort of gives me goosebumps because there's a few product ideas that I would think of is one of the biggest pain. If you look at sort of the biomarkers of longevity or the key drivers, you got muscle mass, you got VO2 max, and sleep recovery ties into it. One of the hardest things I think to get tests on is is VO2 max, and even nutritionally, like what spikes your glucose, right? Like the CGM, the hormone levels as you grow old. So I mean, I would see like having some of those tracking capabilities integrated, but then also I wonder, I think there's an opportunity to have a lab where you go and do a blood test and a VO2 max test and get a DEXA scan. Like if you do those three things, then it tells you everything about your body. It's very exciting to see Whoop become like this healthcare company. Now, between AI, wearables, personalization, where do you think this whole space is heading in the next 5-10 years? And what would it look like for the average person? Because I still think right now, the majority of the people are just health enthusiasts, right? The average person isn't there.
Right. That's true. And I think part of it is, we're just getting started. We've got millions of members, but we don't yet have tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions. And we are growing very quickly. And I believe in the future, every human on this planet should have a wearable that's helping them measure their health. And so we are just scratching the surface in terms of helping people all around the world in that way. So we want to make Whoop more accessible so that anyone who has a heart can have a Whoop. And I believe if we just can do at scale what we are now doing for a smaller number of people out there, it will just obviously have a much bigger impact. And so the way I think about our North Star as a company over the next decade, what do we want to accomplish? We want to add more healthy years to the planet. And I believe that over the next decade, we could potentially add over 1 billion healthy years to the planet. And that's a metric we can actually measure now because we have this Whoop age metric, and we can see what was your Whoop age when you signed up for Whoop and your Whoop age was first revealed, and what is it today? And if you went from being a 44 Whoop age to a 41 Whoop age, you've just suddenly gained 3 healthy years. And if we look at those deltas across our entire member base, and we add all of that up. By the way, some people get older, not younger, so we have to add up the ones that aren't good as well. But if we look at it all together and we say the cumulative number of healthy years added is X, that's the number that I want to grow to 1 billion, even more than I wanted to get to 1 billion MAU when I was at Facebook. And that was a very exciting moment in time when we hit that milestone. But I feel like adding healthy years to the planet, it's hard for me to think of a more exciting and inspirational metric to grow than that.
Andy Johns, who's probably your colleague at Facebook, and we recently talked about this concept of first mountain versus second mountain. And first mountain is chasing the next milestone, the next goal. Right. And that was probably your million or billion MAU at Facebook. And the second mountain is about joy. Happiness is temporary. Joy is like sort of flow state where you're focused more on the impact of the work you're doing rather than the number. And I think 1 billion healthy years is such a noble impact, right? That it probably doesn't end with your stint if you ever say, you know what, I'm going to hang it up. It like just carries on, right?
Totally.
It's a forever sort of goal kind of thing. So I love that. Right. Now, it would be unfair to our audience having the OG growth guy from Silicon Valley and not talk about some growth tactics here. So in like almost rapid fire-ish, how should founders think about choosing that North Star metric, and what signals tell you it's wrong? Because you talked about 1 billion MAUs at Facebook and now adding 1 billion years, and that's, I guess, a North Star at Whoop, right?
That's right. Yeah, I think picking a North Star is a very important thing to do because it really does align the entire company around what you're trying to accomplish. And just to give an example, at Facebook, our North Star metric was MAU, monthly active users, until we hit 1 billion. And I remember Zuck took us out, the growth leadership team, over to his house and grilled steak for us and said it was the proudest day of his life. But the next day, after we'd crossed 1 billion MAU, the first question was, what's our next goal? Is it 2 billion MAU or is it something else? And we actually changed our North Star metric from MAU to DAU, daily active users. And one of the reasons we did that was this was right around the time that we were seeing this big shift from desktop to mobile. And one thing we saw, people that used Facebook on their mobile phones were much more likely to use it every day and multiple times per day. And by shifting that North Star metric from MAU to DAU, it actually influenced a lot of the things we did to grow more, because we realized it's important not just to have someone use this product once a month. We want people using it every single day. So that's just an example of like my time at Facebook, how we changed our North Star metric. And when you're deciding what to prioritize and what to work on, it changes what you prioritize based on what that North Star metric is. So when I went to Uber, one of the very first things I did when I started up the growth team was I said to our small team of 5 people, like, we've got to come up with a North Star metric. What should the North Star metric at Uber be? And it would have been easy to say, oh, well, Facebook was MAU, Uber should also be MAU, monthly active riders. But that actually ignored the fact that Uber was a two-sided marketplace and drivers were important too. And to only look at the riders was kind of ignoring one side of the marketplace that was a very important side of the marketplace to consider. So after a lot of brainstorming, and it probably took us a couple of weeks before we landed on this, and it's one of those things that in hindsight is pretty obvious, but we set a North Star metric to be weekly trips. How many trips are happening around the world every week? And the nice thing about a trip is every trip that happens needs both a driver and a rider. So that being our North Star metric, you can then break that down into components and say, well, to get more trips, you need more drivers doing more trips and you need more riders doing more trips. And we actually organized our growth team to kind of map to how we'd break down that North Star metric. So we had a rider growth team and a driver growth team. And then those teams, we kind of split up into smaller teams to work on different parts of optimizing those metrics. And one thing that also wasn't obvious to me when I first started at Uber, but we later realized, was we were actually supply constrained in most of our markets, not demand constrained. So when I first got there from Facebook, all I was thinking about is like, oh, how do we get more people, more riders to sign up for Uber and take more trips? When actually the thing that unlocked the most growth for us was getting more drivers signing up to become Uber drivers. We were supply constrained because when we didn't have enough drivers, prices would surge and then people would stop riding because it was too expensive. So by adding more drivers, it just sucked in more and more demand. So those are a couple of examples of North Star, how we thought about North Star metrics at both Facebook and Uber. And then at Whoop, I really like this healthy years added as kind of our long-term, decade-long North Star. We do have like another metric in 2025 we're really focused on, which was daily active members, because that's kind of a leading indicator for a lot of these other things. So we're looking at both of those metrics. We're also, because healthy years added is such a new metric for us, we just released Health Span less than a year ago. We're still observing the seasonality of that metric. What we found so far is that in the winter months, people don't exercise as much and they actually, their Whoop age gets a little bit worse. And then in the warmer summer months, it gets better. So we want to just observe at least 12 months of seasonality before we start to set longer term targets for that healthy years added metric.
Now, what are some leading indicators then you watch, right? Because you have this sort of North Star. And how do you then set the leading indicators in place to see we're moving towards that? Because that sets the entire focus, and you could be looking at the wrong leading indicators or maybe sort of misguided and then go off.
Totally. Yeah. So great question. I think the short answer is once we figure out what that North Star is, it's really important to break that into its components. And usually it's just like a very simple equation. So the same way I was talking about at Uber, it was trips, and you have to have rider trips and driver trips. And then, you could break rider trips into like new riders taking trips and existing riders taking more trips, and re-engaging churned riders to take more trips. So you can kind of like break that into those sub-metrics. And then those you can really like be looking at every week and every day to see like, are there any leading indicators that this is either going to go up or down? And what are some experiments we can run to figure out things that will improve these metrics? With something like healthy years added at Whoop, I think at the highest level, the way we get more healthy years added is we get more members on Whoop, and we get those members changing their behavior in a way that adds years to their life. So that's the first split is if you think about 1 billion healthy years added, how do you get to 1 billion? Well, one way is if we had 200 million members on average adding 5 years of life. So 200 times 5 is 1 billion. 200 million times 5 is 1 billion. Or maybe we need 500 million members adding on average 2 years of life per member, right? There are different ways to get there, but that's how I'd go from like the North Star metric to, okay, what are like the biggest levers there? And then when obviously having more members is one big piece of that. So then that gets into more of like the kind of growth accounting we used at places like Facebook, where it's like, okay, if we want more members, how do we do that? We need to, one, keep acquiring more new members. Two is keep our existing members engaged and retain them, make sure they don't churn. And three is members who have churned, let's re-engage them and bring them back. And so kind of regardless of what your product is, you're probably going to look at a growth kind of accounting framework that's pretty much follows that, acquiring new members, retaining existing members, and re-engaging churn members as the way to drive towards more total members.
Fantastic. Now, what's very interesting is you didn't talk about revenue as a North Star. Can you break that down, why revenue and those kind of targets are different than the North Star?
Yeah, good question. I get asked this question fairly often. And I think for some businesses, you could use revenue. I personally like to use non-revenue metrics when possible. If there's a metric that's highly correlated with revenue, but that's not revenue, it can sometimes just feel like a more tangible metric that I think that a team can really get excited about and get alignment around. So for example, at Uber, the North Star metric was weekly trips, but that's highly correlated with revenue, because if you take your weekly trips times your average, price per trip, that's your revenue. So I like to get something that's very correlated with revenue, but it kind of feels, I think for a lot of people, it would feel like more exciting to say, hey, we've gotten to 1 billion trips than, hey, we've gotten to $1 billion. Or whatever the number is. That said, I do think if it becomes clear that revenue really is highly correlated with whatever your North Star is, I think there's nothing wrong with using revenue as a North Star. Even here at Whoop, we're very focused on that. And the way I think about revenue at Whoop is if people are spending more money on the product, that means more people are using it and it's helping them live healthier lives. So I think you can go either way.
Definitely. And I like the North Star metric that's more product customer focused than revenue, because revenue is the byproduct. I think sometimes if you just put revenue as a number there, then people can take shortcuts on product or customer outcomes to drive the revenue. And that short-term gain ends up being sort of long-term pain, right? You stray the product because there's multiple ways to probably get to the revenue, discounting or like bumping up some other thing that's not product related. But ultimately, I think the sustainability comes on product. Now, on viral loops, because Friendly scaled to tens of millions of users, how do you think about viral loops today in the age of AI? I think it's harder today, but even more relevant.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, back when I first, built my first viral website, it was back when I was in college. This was dating me, but I was a sophomore at Harvard in 1999 and built a website called datesite.com that within a week, over a quarter of the students had signed up for. So that was kind of my first experience with building something that grew in this viral way. Back then, it was a lot easier because there weren't a lot of viral websites or apps out there. I think these days, it's a lot harder to kind of make things grow virally in the same way. It used to be that you could draw out your viral loop and measure each step of the loop and multiply them all together and calculate your K factor. And once that K factor was above 1, you'd see that exponential viral growth. I think these days, especially with AI, what we're seeing is the way you get things to go viral is not just like optimizing a viral loop and A/B testing every step. I think you just have to build an amazing product that has that magical moment where someone uses it and is like, this is awesome. I want to tell all of my friends about it. So I think these days, actually, the way to make things go viral is much more about the art than the science. It's like really focus on just building an awesome product. And if you do, people will start using it, because there are already a lot of ways to share that product. You don't have to like build in the address book importer and the sharing flows and all that stuff. Just build a great product and it's going to go viral if it really is good.
The games of sharing have changed in the last 15 years. Yeah, you had to build those importers and it tells you your friends and now it's just there. What's interesting is I had Jeff Lawson, Twilio CEO, speak at one of our conferences and he made one point. He's like, if you A/B test everything to the nth degree to optimize for that virality, eventually every site sort of becomes a porn site. And you let the customer be like, fall in
Yeah.
love with the customer and let their outcome be your primary guide. And that's how you build a
Yeah.
sustainable sort of growth engine. This has
Yeah.
been great, Ed. I want to take some questions in rapid fire, probably in the next few minutes.
Okay.
Mindset as a performance lever. Anything you do for mindset that's been helpful?
Anything I do for mindset? I think a lot of the stuff we already talked about. Sleep and exercise.
Awesome. HRV as a scoreboard. Why does it matter?
HRV, everyone has their own HRV ranges. So it's important to know that. Like as an absolute number, it's a very personal thing. My HRV tends to be actually quite low, absolute numbers, but it's still very important. I look at my HRV first thing every morning because for me, that shows me how I'm doing relative to how I've done in the past. So this morning I had a low HRV and a red recovery score, and I'm constantly trying to figure out what are behaviors I can do to have a higher HRV.
Awesome. And biohacks that are worth it and not.
Ooh, I'll try to think of something we haven't already talked about. I've recently liked taking hot baths. I've done like the cold plunge, the sauna, all that stuff. I feel like not many people talk about hot baths, and that sounds like, I don't know, maybe it doesn't sound quite as sexy as a sauna and cold plunge, but I find that allows the heat to really deeply enter your muscles. After I do like a hard track workout or something, I just put Epsom salt in the bath, make it really hot, and sit in there for 15 to 20 minutes. I'm like sweating. It's something I've recently discovered, and it helps me a lot.
There's one consistent theme with you is the stuff that people talk about like on social media in a very sort of animated way. It's just normal way of living for you. Like you don't sort of sexify it. It's like, this is how it is kind of thing. So I love that. Very understated. One supplement you won't go without.
Oh, I don't take many supplements. I'd say it comes back to protein. I do, in order to make sure I get enough protein, I will, like this morning, I made a shake and put in some protein powder. So probably it would be protein.
No creatine or anything like that?
No, I've tried creatine once before, and then I just like, I actually, it's a longer story. I had an atrial fibrillation episode shortly after I started using creatine. It may be a total coincidence, but it kind of like freaked me out enough where I decided to stop taking it.
That's interesting. One metric you track the most?
Well, we talked about HRV. So that's definitely one of them. I'd say other than that, well, right now when I'm training, my weekly mileage.
Okay. Most underrated recovery habit. And we talked about sleep a ton, but is there another one?
We talked about sleep. We talked about the hot bath. That would probably be the underrated one. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, I find massage, that maybe this isn't underrated, but deep tissue massage is, I find so helpful. So if you're able to do that, or even if you just use a Theragun or anything you can do to like massage your muscles is really helpful.
Definitely. And I think massage, deep tissue, actually, when people think of massage, they just think of being, I guess, rub down kind of thing, right? Like light when you go anywhere.
It hurt. When it's done well, it can hurt.
Yeah. And I've had that. I had my business partner from my previous co-founder had an issue with his shoulder for 8 months and nobody could do anything with it. And then we took him to a specialized deep tissue. They do the fascia scraping and it went away.
Oh, wow.
Like after one session.
Wow.
So I think it's underrated because your muscles get tight, especially if you don't stretch, foam roll, or any of that.
Totally.
One health mistake you see founders making over and over again?
Not getting enough sleep.
I'll sleep when I
That would be the
exit.
biggest
I'll sleep
one.
when I die. I'll sleep when I die. I used to say that.
I think it's a mistake.
Sleep is for the weak. I'll sleep when I die. I'll sleep when you exit. All of those things I've heard and said myself. And the last one, the best $100 you've spent on your own health, maybe in the last year or so.
Best $100 on my own health. I think it would be, I have this thing called a hip hook. It helps me get to my hip flexors, and I just this comes back to like the deep tissue massage, but I tend to get really tight hip flexors, and that has been really helpful.
And it's just called the hip hook and you buy it on Amazon, or?
Just called the hip hook. Yeah, it's online. There's like a website. I can't remember what it is, but if you Google hip hook, it probably is on there. So if you have tight hip flexors, probably worth checking that out.
Awesome. And that's it. That's a wrap. Any final piece of advice or any call out for the audience in terms of what Whoop is doing?
Just want to say, if you want to try Whoop, please do. You can either get one on Amazon, or if you go to whoop.com, you can get a free trial. Try it for 30 days, see how you like it. If it's not for you, you can send it back for free, but hopefully you'll like it and get as much out of it as I have, and as I think a lot of our other members have.
Thank you, Ed. This has been fantastic, very inspiring.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Also helps me believe that I can somewhat get closer to the 75 goal, even if not 6 months, maybe a year this year.
Good luck. You got this. You got it. You can do it.
Appreciate you, Ed.
Okay. Appreciate you too. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.